Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening around the world. A very warm welcome from London in the UK. Here is today's news about electric cars and the future of transport. My name is Martin Lee. This is your EV News Daily for Tuesday, the 20th of March 2018. Coming up on the show today, Goldman Sachs raise a red flag over the Model 3. VW showcase a Pikes Peak Extreme EV. Skoda play catch-up with the Citigo, and the evolution of a Tesla supercharger. But first of all, starting with a plug-in hybrid today, the new Range Rover P400e has been tested by Evo Magazine. And I'll admit it, 2.5 tons of metal and leather is not friendly to the planet in any way imaginable. In fact, it's questionable who even needs a car this big and heavy. Nobody. Who wants one? Well, plenty of people. But nobody needs a Range Rover that weighs 2.5 tons. Well, like all plug-in hybrids, this is a petrol and not a diesel. There are no new diesel hybrids that I can even think of. There might be some, none that I've seen coming to the market, because all those diesel torques, which now come from electrons, do the job. The 114 brake horsepower motor, in fact, makes it far more powerful than driving on fossil fuels alone. Well, Evo say that Land Rover quotes up to 31 miles of all-electric driving from the battery, up to 85 miles an hour, and a more realistic EV range, they say, is 20 miles, requiring a 7.5-hour charge on a 10-amp plug, like your 3-pin or 2-pin plug, or a 2-hour, 45-minute top-up at a 32-amp charger. You can, if you choose, they say, drive the car on the road entirely in EV-only mode, and I think that's key, because when you buy a car this luxurious, you like it to be quiet. And when you first drive an EV, I would argue were the two things I would argue, actually. The first one is the acceleration, the torques, up to legal speed limits, of course. The second one is that you realise you're talking and you're not shouting to people in the car. Those are the two things which blow people away. And if you buy a big Range Rover, you want luxury, quiet luxury. Well, since the electric motor acts through the four-wheel drive transmission, Land Rover's familiar terrain response functions all operate quite happily when you're in electric mode only for those 31 miles, regardless of the surface that you are traversing. They go on to say that it'll wade up to almost a metre in electric mode only. Land Rover do recommend, though, that the engine is running to prevent water ingress into the exhaust system. The good news is the car is predictably silent when running in EV mode, enough so that they say, Evo say, it's slightly disappointing. I love this. It's slightly disappointing when the combustion engine engages. This is Evo Magazine, right? I've read this for years and years and years. This is a magazine that is all about big, fast cars with big engines. Bit let down when the engine came on. We were quite enjoying it in EV mode only. They say the combined efforts of the electric and the petrol power deliver performance that's suitably on par with other engine options. The electric motor's low-end effort, they say, seems to be key to that, given the Range Rover P400e smart acceleration with relatively little accelerator input. Even when the petrol engine joins in, it's quiet to be largely unobtrusive. A full charge, they say, on the batteries will see you very rarely topping up for petrol, unleaded petrol, no diesel, if you just do the typical kind of 20-30 miles that people do on their Monday to Friday commute. Read more, please do, at the ever-brilliant Evo Magazine. Well, moving on, Tesla shares took a hit today. According to Business Insider, a Goldman Sachs analyst believes Tesla's going to miss its guidance for Model S and X vehicle deliveries and fall well below consensus on the Model 3 deliveries in the first quarter Q1 2018, as we're heading towards the end of that now. The electric automaker has dealt with production bottlenecks, they say, mainly due to difficulties around producing battery modules. Yet we all knew that already. They told us that in a timely manner. The analyst maintained a sell rating on Tesla. Price target, $205 a share. Today's shares in Tesla were down 1.5%. Well, Pikes Peak Hill Climb is an annual event in Colorado, and it could mark the return to motorsport for VW. They've been putting on a series of images on social media about this car, and now it all makes sense when you put them together. They've published an image of a car with a short, stubby nose, exactly how you would design an EV that didn't need a combustion engine or the room for it as well. It looks like nothing you've seen so far from VW, in fact from anyone, for a hill climb car. It's extreme aero, massive rear wing. It looks like a cartoon. Honestly, it looks very cool. Now, with the event this year in June, VW still have more time to prepare the car to compete in the event. It'll be a great way to showcase their electric technology, which they've already had in the Audi e-tron, in prototype form, the Porsche Mission E as well from the VW group, or as many car makers do with things like Le Mans, they could be using Pikes Peak as an incentive for their engineers and designers to push the boundaries, push those limits of electric technology that eventually feeds down to the cars that you and I buy. Either way, whilst I understand VW pulling out of motorsport following Dieselgate, they didn't want to be seen as burning fossil fuels by the world. Getting back into motorsport with an EV would make a lot of sense. Well, there's a phrase, I'm not sure if it's ubiquitous, but whether you've heard it or not, it's smell what sells. It's basically about being ahead of the money. And already in 2018, by the middle of March, VC firms, venture capital firms, have invested $1 billion in battery technology, according to the Financial Times. We're 1 quarter in almost, and we've doubled the battery technology investment from 2017 in total. Now, thedrive.com say you can think of venture capitalists as rich firms that roll the dice on developing companies. They cash out for huge sums of money on their investments, but they can also burn up in front of them. High risk, high reward business model. This year, the number of investments in battery companies from VCs is likely to hit 60, up from 37 last year. The first $1 billion have been spread across 15 companies so far. Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi announced $1 billion in a venture capital fund and set to invest $200 million already every year over the next 5 years. While the Drive continue, the Oxys Energy received $5.2 million to develop a lithium sulfur battery. Now that can pack 5 times the energy of conventional lithium ion. Other companies are looking to produce solid-state batteries which can provide greater range for electric cars, they say. So whilst everyone has an opinion on electric cars, and many people pitch themselves as sort of expert commentators, either for or against or whatever, just look where the money is, right? I read an article over the weekend. It was on Forbes. Not sure whether they wrote it or whether it was kind of syndicated to them or whatever. But it had an industry old-timer, right? And it quoted some car expert who says electric cars are always 5 years away. And he says, when I die, they'll still be 5 years away. Now, by the way, I hope he doesn't die soon. But I do think he's very wrong, because people with that much money to invest in the billions of dollars don't tend to be wrong very often, because they end up as people without billions of dollars if they get it wrong. So I think you'll find they tend to be right more than wrong. And that means EVs are not 5 years away. I'm sorry to tell you, industry old-timer. All right, next story. Everyone wants their parcels delivered within seconds of hitting the order button on Amazon. I know I do. Like, where is it now? UPS are making all those trips slightly more friendly to the planet. According to Seeking Alpha, UPS's entire central London fleet's going to be purely electric, marking the beginning of the end. That's their quote, the beginning of the end for the internal combustion engine. UPS's new intelligent smart grid sounds interesting. It's going to stagger when delivery trucks come back to the depot and charge. It solves the problem of needing to recharge a large number of vehicles simultaneously without having to pay for a big power supply upgrade. Well, moving on to another VW company, and Skoda. This time, Skoda's going to be making an electric version of the Citigo mini car, as all car makers try to avoid the fines from Europe for missing the CO2 targets for their fleets. According to Auto News, the Citigo EV is going to launch by the end of next year, based on the VW e-Up. Great little car. Terrible range. A battery-powered version of the mini car will help Skoda fulfill tougher EU emissions limits that come into effect from 2020. This says in Auto News. And a Skoda spokesman told Automotive News Europe the same thing. Well, VW plans to launch 80 full electrics across their 12 brands. Skoda will account for 5 of those, just 5 by 2025. The Citigo EV is going to have a range of 186 miles. Now, I imagine that's still being done NEDC, not WLTP. They're still using the outgoing methodology, which is what's the word? Optimistic. It's going to be called the Citigo E, says Land Rover. He's Skoda's sales and marketing boss. After the Citigo EV, future Skoda battery cars will use VW's MEB platform. That's the one that is going to be using, they're going to use the platform to build the VW ID that you may have seen pictures or videos of online. All of the VW companies, I imagine, will be using that to make the best bang for their buck. Well, VW claim an engine can be zero emissions. I'm confused by that. It seems like smoke and mirrors, but if you listen to what I'm about to say, technically, logically and factually, I do see what VW are saying. Bear with me. VW recently launched the 1.5 TSI micro hybrid petrol engine. They say efficient as a diesel. It includes temporary cylinder deactivation and complete engine shutoff, plus variable turbine turbocharger technology. According to Just Auto, this new VW engine, right, deactivates cylinders or completely shuts itself off, which they call EcoCoasting. Okay, whenever it's possible. It deactivates two inner cylinders and always does this when power demand is low. Complete deactivation operates within 1,400 RPM to 4,000 RPM when it's up to 75 miles an hour or 130 Ks. The driver gets advised by a little notification on the instrument panel. When coasting, the engine switches off completely to what they call zero emissions mode. Playing a little fast and loose with the phrase zero emissions, which is normally reserved for battery electric vehicles. They call it EcoCoasting, and it's a micro hybrid. It uses a 12-volt system and a lithium-ion battery to supply the relevant electrical systems in the car when the engine's turned off, when you're coasting. It's enormously clever, right? Some very clever VW people have worked this out. But isn't it a bit like keeping the Titanic afloat for another couple of hours or so? I don't think you should really call it zero emissions. It's a bit like if you're in a bar fight and being asked if you'd like to be punched in the face 10% less of the time because this engine is 10% more efficient than a petrol engine. I'd like just not to be punched in the face, please. I'd rather drive an electric car. However, it does appear to be passing the definition of hybrid and electrified. And all those cities that are banning cars that are either hybrid or electrified, that promise starts to ring a little hollow if all they've got to do is make a very clever petrol engine. All right, couple more stories. Firstly, in London, 100 new rapid chargers. This was passed on to me, by the way, from Kenneth on YouTube. Thank you, Kenneth. Amazing. Thank you so much. I put the audio of this on YouTube. I didn't think anybody would listen to it. It's YouTube, after all, and a podcast, and people do, loads. And Kenneth passed this on. In London, 100 new rapid chargers unveiled yesterday. 51 of them only for use by London's electric black cabs. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said the new chargers mark a big step forward in the shift to zero-emissions vehicles, which the capital desperately needs to clean up our toxic air. The number of EVs in London is about 10% of the UK total, said Sadiq Khan, and alongside around 2,000 standard charge points already installed, 150 Transport for London funded rapid chargers are going to be in place by the end of this year. Amazing news. Autocar say this: drivers of cabs between 10 and 15 years old can apply for a grant of up to £5,000 in exchange for retiring their old stinky diesel taxi. With the government's plug-in taxi grant, they get a total of £7,500 off a new electric taxi. The newly announced 50 kilowatt chargers are soon going to be joined by some very special, long-awaited 150 kilowatt chargers. They're being rolled out across the country by a charging company here in the UK called PodPoint. Check them out. Inspirational CEO or chief exec. I'm sure I've got that wrong, but anyway. The big cheese, the man in charge, top guy at PodPoint. Those chargers, by the way, will have the highest EV plug power in Britain and enable some electric cars like the I-Pace, that's 100 kilowatts, like the new Audi e-tron, that'll do 150, 80% in 45 minutes or half hour. ChargeMaster is another British charger company. They've got 150 kilowatt chargers in the development pipeline, and they could be beginning their installation in Britain before the end of the year. Right, one more story to go, and finally, I'm sure you, like me, a huge fan of Clean Technica, they just took the time to chart the progress of Tesla's supercharger network in America from their own archives. It is fascinating. I urge you to go and read it. In 2013, there were 6 superchargers. How time flies. 6 superchargers in California and 2 on the East Coast. At the same time, the supercharger max power got boosted from 90 kilowatts to 120 kilowatts. And by the end of 2014, they write, Tesla's supercharger network exploded to 884 individual charging points across 141 supercharger stations, as compared to 776 CHAdeMO charging points in the US, and that was just 4 years ago. Well, today there are 8,496 superchargers, and even here in the UK, if I wanted to, I'm on the south coast. When I'm not working in London, I live outside of London, by the way, got a long old train journey each day. I'm a long-distance commuter. Here in the UK, I live on the south coast of the UK, and I could easily go to Scotland and back, other end of the country. Using Tesla superchargers wouldn't be a problem. A ton of them here, ton of them in Europe, all around the world. An incredible job Tesla have done. Well, I would love to spread the word about electric cars. If you can, share this with somebody who might be interested. Every previous episode of this podcast is on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. Thank you, Spotify, for putting us on there. YouTube, and now TuneIn. Thank you, TuneIn, for adding us to your platform. On the blog, evnewsdaily.com. You can subscribe because it's free, it's daily. You get it first if you subscribe, and then you know it's always waiting for you. A quick rate and review is always appreciated, and if you've got an Amazon Echo, download the skill. EV News Daily is what you need to search for. On Twitter, we are at EV News Daily. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and I'll catch you tomorrow.